Hey guys, welcome to week 4 of John's Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm John, and I am happy to have you guys here. I hope you guys enjoyed week 3, but to be honest, it was one of the weirdest weeks of fantasy football that I've ever seen. My weekly picks and weekly sits didn't do too great, and honestly, all the top players really didn't do great. The Vikings decided to go to Thielen instead of Jefferson. The Raiders decided to go to Mac Hollins instead of Devontae Adams. All these top running backs haven't really been playing well. Derrick Henry finally had a breakout game, but for the most part, nobody's fantasy team really did well unless you had Hurts or Devonta Smith or Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews. Those are the only top players that really performed last week. So hopefully this week it's going to be better, and I have some good predictions for you guys. In this podcast, I'm going to be talking about the London game tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. It is going to be starting before I go live on TikTok. So I'm going to give you guys my thoughts on that game, give you guys the starts and sits for that game, as well as I'm going to talk about some injuries because there's a lot to take into account this week, not only in that early game in London with Michael Thomas and Dalvin Cook separating his shoulder, but also in the later games with Mac Jones, DeAndre Swift, Amon-Ra St. Brown, a lot of injuries to consider. I'm going to touch on those. And then I'm going to finish off with a little bit of trade advice, recapping what I said last week, because I think there are some guys that you guys should go and get right now while you still can. But before I get into it, I want to tell you guys, if you aren't subscribed already, hit that subscribe button, like the video, comment any questions you have, and stay tuned because we have a Dorm Debate podcast where the 4 of us guys talk about the NFL. If you guys want something other than fantasy advice, definitely stay tuned for that. We post every Thursday, so subscribe so you never miss any of my fantasy videos and so you can check out the Dorm Debate podcast video with all 4 of us guys. But without further ado, I'll get into my starts and sit for the London game. Tomorrow, 9:30 a.m., it's going to be the Saints and the Vikings. 2 key injuries to talk about, actually 3. Michael Thomas is ruled out for the game. Jameis Winston is officially doubtful. Andy Dalton is preparing to start for this game. And also Dalvin Cook dislocated his shoulder last week. He's going to be wearing a harness, but should you start him? I'm going to talk about all that right now. So I'm going to start with the obvious start for the week, Justin Jefferson. He did have a disappointing week last week, only 4 points. They went to Thielen instead, and Thielen got the touchdown. But if you have Jefferson, you're starting him. I know it might be a little bit of a tough matchup with Marshawn Lattimore, but you're still starting Jefferson. Hopefully you get to watch that game. Hopefully Jefferson stands out and gets back to his wide receiver 1 status, getting 15 to 20 fantasy points. Second, I'm going to talk about Dalvin Cook. And last time Dalvin Cook dislocated his shoulder, it was last season, and he ended up coming back the next game wearing a harness, which he's going to be wearing this time, and he ended up with over 150 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Steelers. I think it was a Thursday night game, if I'm not mistaken, and I posted on TikTok before that game, and I told people to start Cook and sit Madison, and it ended up working out, and I would do the same for this time. This time, it's a little bit of a tougher matchup. He plays the Saints, who have a pretty good run defense, but you're still starting Dalvin Cook if you have him. If you have Alexander Madison, you're trying not to start him this week unless you're really desperate. I like other guys like Khalil Herbert, Rashad Penny, guys in that range better than Alexander Madison because Cook is fully healthy this week. So the next guy on my list was Madison, so I would sit him if you can help it. And then another guy on the Vikings is Adam Thielen. I would try not to get him in your lineup this week. He did have a good game last week, had over 15 fantasy points, did score a touchdown, but I don't think he's going to have as good of a game this week. I don't think it's going to be a super high-scoring game in London. Both teams have to get used to that time difference, so I think they might be a little bit sluggish. Maybe one of the teams will get in the 20s, maybe hit 25, but I would sit Thielen unless you don't have any other good options. And then moving on to the Saints, Michael Thomas ruled out for the game. Chris Olave we saw have a great week and get targeted a lot 2 weeks ago, and then last week, a lot of people put him in their lineup, which was great. I ended up having him on my sit or on my weekly pick list, but I never ended up putting him in my weekly picks. And the reason was because Michael Thomas and Landry were there. But the thing is, last week, Thomas and Landry both got hurt during the game, which opened up targets for Chris Olave, and he was able to, capitalize on that. So this week, Chris Olave is going to be the main wide receiver 1 for the for the Saints. And I know Andy Dalton is slated to start, so you're like, oh, John, I don't know. Should I start Olave? I mean, Jameis isn't playing. It's Winston. Is it a good matchup? It's actually a really good matchup against the Vikings, and I would really try to get Olave into your lineup. He's basically a must-start this week. He's been targeted a lot. Michael Thomas is out, and Landry was limited in practice this week. They might not even use him that much. I think Olave's going to get targeted a lot. I think they're going to run the ball with Kamara. So if you have Olave, try to get him into your lineup. And then, like I mentioned, Andy Dalton, I don't think he's a good streaming option this week. If you do have Winston and he was one of your quarterbacks, who the guy I'm recommending this week to stream is Mitchell Trubisky, and I know you might be worried about that, but he's been in the mid-teens, 14, 15 points. Last week against the Browns, Thursday Night Football, he didn't look that good, but this week against the Jets, they've had 10 days to rest for this game and game plan. I think Trubisky has a decent game. I think Pickens definitely has a better game, maybe his best of his career so far. So if you have Winston, you're looking for a streamer, Mitch Trubisky might be somebody you want to look at. Last week at this time, I told people to pick up Geno Smith and put him in instead of Russell Wilson. Smith ended up with 19. Russ ended up with under 10, I think. So that was a good streaming option. So Trubisky, if you want a streaming option, not Dalton. And then the last guy is Alvin Kamara. He has been very underwhelming so far. He's questionable. It seems like he is going to play. If you have Kamara, it's tough to start him. I mean, I think Kamara is probably going to get around 13 to 15 fantasy points. So if you're happy with that, then you could put him in your lineup. If you're not happy with that and you think you might lose your matchup and you want to take a chance on somebody else with higher upside, definitely go for it. Some guy like Rashad Penny, I would take Rashad Penny over Kamara only because I think Penny has high upside this week, and I'll explain why on my live tomorrow morning. But if you're happy with 13 to 15 points, put Kamara in, and that's a pretty decent floor for a guy who hasn't been playing really well so far. So those are my start sits for the London game. If you guys have any other questions, definitely DM me, message me on the Patreon if you are a supporter over there. I'm going to talk about some injuries now because I want to talk about DeAndre Swift, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Christian McCaffrey all of a sudden might not play this week. What should you do if any of them don't play or do play? I'm going to get into that right now. I'm going to start off with DeAndre Swift and Amon-Ra St. Brown. They were both ruled out for this game. A lot of people probably picked up Jamal Williams on the waiver wire this week. If you have Jamal Williams, he's not a must start, but I think he's a good start this week. We really haven't seen these Detroit Lions without DeAndre Swift or Amon-Ra St. Brown. Last year, DeAndre Swift made a name for himself. Amon-Ra St. Brown really didn't take off until Swift got hurt in that game against the Vikings, and then Amon-Ra really started to get going and put up a lot of fantasy points. So we really haven't seen this team without Amon-Ra or Swift. I think they're not going to score a lot of points, which is why I like Rashad Penny in this game. I think the Seahawks are going to be leading the game, and I think they're going to run the ball, and I like Penny to probably have his best game of the season. Not saying he's going to get 30 fantasy points, but I think he's going to get 18 to 20 carries. Hopefully he'll break that 18 to 20 fantasy point mark, but we'll see. I don't know if he's going to be on my weekly pick list, but he is a potential option to be on that weekly pick list. Check back for my live tomorrow to see if he is. But in terms of Amon-Ra and Swift, if you have Jamal Williams, I like Penny a little bit more this week, but Jamal Williams should be good for at least maybe 10 to 11 fantasy points. That's his floor. I think his ceiling is closer to 19, 20. I don't think he's going to get over 20. And a lot of people might be like, well, John, he literally had 80 yards. He had 20 carries. He had 2 touchdowns last week. If he even gets 1 catch, now he's over 20 fantasy points. Yes, but I think they're going to use Craig Reynolds, and I don't think they're going to hold the ball for that long. Don't forget they have Josh Reynolds and DJ Chark on the outside. They're decent streaming options. I like Reynolds more. He has got more opportunities last week, but I really don't like Williams a lot to score a lot of touchdowns this week because I'm fearing that they won't be able to move the ball a lot down the field without Amon-Ra or Swift. Getting on to McCaffrey, he was limited all week. They're talking about him might not play this week. They're going to put him through pregame warmups, and even if he does, he might be a little bit limited, so keep eyes on McCaffrey. If McCaffrey doesn't play, you do not want to pick up Donta Foreman or Chuba Hubbard. They are not good options. Neither of them will get over 12, 13 fantasy points, so I don't like them. If you're looking for somebody to pick up, join my live tomorrow. I might have a deep running back you can get, or ask me on the Patreon if you're deciding between Donta Foreman, Chuba Hubbard, or somebody else. If you have McCaffrey, you're probably trying to start him based on how the reports come out before the game tomorrow. If it seems like he's going to be limited and might aggravate it, then you might not want to put him in, but it's tough for me to think that you have much better options other than McCaffrey unless you're in a 6, 8, maybe a 10-man league. So in terms of McCaffrey, be careful. Don't pick up any of his backups. James Conner, and Hollywood Brown. James Conner was taken off the injury report, and Cliff Kingsbury wants to get James Conner more involved in the offense, which is exciting for me. I have him in one of my 12-man leagues. I'm starting him this week. I'm pretty confident in Conner. Hopefully he'll get a couple targets, maybe 5 catches out of the backfield, be more involved. Hollywood Brown practiced Wednesday and Thursday, but was put on the injury report on Friday, which is never good, but he should still play. Check his status tomorrow morning. But Hollywood Brown, 17 targets last week, 14 catches, 140 yards. You have to find a way to get him into your lineup before D-Hop comes back. And if you do have Marquise Brown, maybe try to trade him this week. Maybe try to trade him after this game before D-Hop comes back. He has been great, but maybe a good sell high option. Maybe you can get one of those top tier receivers. What if you trade Marquise Brown for Jamar Chase, or even throw a backup running back, one of your bench players in to get that deal done for Chase, because Chase is a top guy, top receiver that hasn't been performing well so far this season, but has good upside the rest of the season. And then Mac Jones, what to make of Mac Jones? There's really not many fantasy relevant players on the New England Patriots. But what I think is going to happen if Mac Jones doesn't play, which he actually is ruled out, so he won't play, but I think they're going to run the ball a lot. Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson are decent fantasy options. No other player on the Patriots should be started, not even their defense. It's literally not even Folk as the kicker. It's only Harris or Stevenson as options. And I think that's actually bad news for the Packers. The Patriots are going to run the clock down. They're going to want to make this game as short as possible and keep Aaron Rodgers off the field. So I do like A.J. Dillon, but in terms of Dobbs, I wouldn't really stream him this week. Lazard, I'm a little worried about, and same with Christian Watson and Aaron Jones. A.J. Dillon's probably a decent option because they're going to run the ball a lot, but just be careful. I think that game will be low scoring, and keep that in mind. And lastly, I want to get to some trade targets. I talked about it last week, but if you missed my podcast from last week, I'm going to recap and give you guys some more thoughts, some insight that I gained over the last week on what you guys should do as far as trades go. The first, quarterback, like I said last week, I think Brady. I think you should get him. Godwin's starting to come back. He's a game-time decision. Julio's a game-time decision. I think Brady getting Evans back this week, Brady's only going to get better and better as the season goes on, and people might be worried that he's old and might not have a lot left in the tank. I don't think that's the case. I think Brady's going to be a great quarterback the rest of the season. So if you can trade for him, I would. And if you have somebody like Jameis, Tua, Dak Prescott, one of those quarterbacks that's gotten hurt, you might want to go and try to get Brady. Maybe try to give up a bench player or flex guy. Look at teams in your league that have Brady and see what type of player they need, and if you can extend an offer for Brady, because I think he has good upside and is going to be a great quarterback the rest of the season. And like I mentioned, Chris Godwin, he's another one of my trade targets. And honestly, if you have Curtis Samuel, I know he's been great and been targeted a lot. I'd rather have Godwin from here on out rather than Curtis Samuel. Now, you might want to wait until after this week, maybe reach out to the guy that has him on your team tonight before the game tomorrow. But I would do Curtis Samuel to get Chris Godwin. I think Godwin's going to have a great season. Remember, Brady only has Evans and Godwin to throw to. No more Gronk, no more AB. I think Godwin's going to get targeted a lot and have a great fantasy season the rest of the year. So I have him in a couple leagues, and I'm trying to get him in a couple more. Eckler is a good running back that I'm trying to target. And if you guys want Eckler and you want a top-tier running back, he's a great one to target, but the bad news is you're going to have to try to get that deal done before Sunday, because Eckler's going to have a great game against the Texans. Khalil Herbert had a great game against them last week. I think Eckler's going to have some touches on the ground, catch some passes. I think Eckler's going to go for over 20 fantasy points tomorrow. So if you can, try to get Eckler from your fantasy manager in your league that has Eckler before Eckler has a good game. So maybe you can give a running back and a flex guy for Eckler to get that RB1 on your fantasy team, because people might be worried about how Eckler's being used, the other running backs in that system. I'm still confident in Eckler to be an RB1 for the rest of the season. And another running back, Dameon Pierce, he was on my list last week. Hopefully you guys traded for him on that Saturday before Sunday, because he got 20 carries in that game the next day against I forget what team they played. They played the Bears. So, I don't know. I forget what team they played. But anyway, yeah, they did play the Bears. Pierce got 20 carries. had over 20 fantasy points, so I really like Pierce. I still like Pierce the rest of the season. I think he's going to get volume against the Chargers. Another guy, if you can get him before tomorrow, but don't overpay for him. He's not an RB1 like Eckler, but he is a solid RB2, so keep that in mind when you're making those trades. And then as far as receiver goes, along with Godwin, I like Deebo Samuel. He's been very disappointing so far, so if you have Deebo, hang in there. If you don't have Deebo, maybe try to get him. Maybe you can give up a flex guy or something like that, somebody who's been having some good weeks. Maybe you can give up a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who I don't think he's going to have great weeks ahead of him. He's been pretty touchdown dependent, and he's gotten those touchdowns. So maybe you can give up a guy like him for Deebo. See how the guy in your league values Deebo, and if you can get him for cheap. And then a tight end is Dalton Schultz. He's been pretty underwhelming so far, but he got hurt in week 1, didn't play in week 2, and then now he's going to probably come back in week 4. He might be a little bit limited, but if you can get Schultz, I would. If you can give up a guy like Gerald Everett for him, and maybe you have to throw in a flex guy, a bench guy as well, I would do that, because Donald Parham is actually returning this week, which is going to cloud up that tight end room for Everett, and Keenan Allen probably coming back next week. I don't like Everett's outlook for the rest of the season, so if you can dump Everett, maybe even throw in a bench guy to get Dalton Schultz. I really like Dalton Schultz the rest of the year, so really try to get Schultz. Try tonight. If you can't get tonight, try early next week, because Everett's stock is going down and Schultz is going up. So that's all I had for this week. If you guys definitely tune into my live tomorrow, 11:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, every Sunday morning. Hope to see you guys there. And if you guys want more advice throughout the week, me to answer your questions, definitely head over to my Patreon. The link is in our bio, in our TikTok and Instagram. Head over to the Patreon, and you can ask me questions throughout the week so I can help you set your lineup and make trades to improve your team based on how your matchup goes and the other teams in your league. I can help based on your situation. But thank you guys for tuning in, and subscribe if you haven't already, and hopefully you guys win this week. Good luck, and I'll see you guys next week.